Alright, so I'm going to keep this intro really short. If you haven't already seen it, this is part 2 of a 2-part like Spider-Man reviewing everything retrospective. In part 1 I covered a whole lot of stuff and you should definitely go and check it out, but if this is the first part that you're seeing, on screen right now is a list of everything I'll be talking about in this video, so let's just go ahead and let's get right into it.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Good morning, New Yorkers. Looking forward
An Avenger.
Alright, so first let's get into Civil War. I really hope to see Peter staying at the Avengers compound in No Way Home, just because I feel like that would be a really good place for him to go out and kind of hide out, and also could lead to some pretty cool cameos, or just getting to see some cool tech, and the MCU Spider-Man has always been very close to the Avengers, so I think that would be a really cool way of handling that. The Left Hands Free is such a good song choice whenever they first introduced Peter Parker in the film. I love the responsibility scene, and without directly saying with great power comes great responsibility, which obviously, just like pretty much anyone else, I hope Toby says that in No Way Home. But the responsibility scene in this film with him and Tony Stark is really good, and it's a really good way of telling that story without specifically saying with great power comes great responsibility. His new suit looks really good. I think it's one of the best Spider-Man suits we've seen in any of the films, that original one in Civil War. And Civil War honestly probably has the perfect Spider-Man. I'm not saying the MCU as a whole does, but Civil War, the way they cover the character is really, really good. And obviously I like that he references Empire Strikes Back as a Star Wars fan. So with that being said, that's kind of my thoughts on Civil War, but let's go ahead and let's move into a film that stars Spider-Man maybe a little bit more. Spider-Man Homecoming. The Marvel Studios intro in this film is perfect with the Spider-Man theme song being played. And I really like, and it's a really fun way for them to start off the film using Peter's vlog segments to kind of... I really like the way that they start the film off like that. Just getting to see him create the web fluid in school is also... The little details like that are what I really like about the MCU Spider-Man. Just like I've said about so many of these films, it has a really, really good soundtrack. And even though at the time of the film's release I didn't love this decision, I think Ned finding out very quick that Peter was Spider-Man was a very good choice, and a lot of the comedy from the film actually plays off of that. The Vulture suit is cool, and I actually really like the Washington Monument scene. I think that's one of the best scenes in the film. The Vulture is one of the best villains that we've seen in a while in these films. I didn't love the villains in the Amazing Spider-Man films. I liked Harry in those films alright, but they were nowhere near as good as the Raimi films, and now with the MCU I feel like they're kind of going back to getting really, really good Spider-Man villains, even if their stories are tied to Iron Man. I know a lot of people don't like that. I personally don't have a problem. I think if you're going to set Peter up to be the small, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, the villain shouldn't be his. He should just be helping out, because that's kind of the whole point of his character in the MCU. It might not be the point of his character in general, but in the MCU, that's kind of what they've set him up to be. The Iron Man argument scene is uncomfortable in the best way. I can't watch the film without not liking the kind of confrontation that the two characters are having, but that's the way you're supposed to feel, so the scene does its job really well. The Vulture being Liv's dad is actually one of the greatest scenes in the film. It really plays off well. It is shocking, especially the first time seeing it. And then the smaller scale missions, I really feel like that fits in with the MCU. It might not have worked if it wasn't in the MCU, if it was just a solo Spider-Man film that wasn't connected. But because it's connected, I really like Spider-Man being put on these small scale missions. I really like that the Vulture survives in this film. I don't like, in a film we're about to talk about in just a few minutes, I don't like that the villain doesn't survive the film. But either way, I wonder how Liz has reacted to finding out that Peter is Spider-Man. I thought about that while watching the film. I'm hoping maybe we get some kind of answer to that in No Way Home. The Iron Spider suit looks really cool, and I kind of like that he turns down being an Avenger. I feel like that really puts this little perfect bow on the film. Pepper is back, because in Civil War it kind of seemed like Pepper and Tony were like having an argument or something, so it's good to see that they're back. And then obviously the film ends with Aunt May finding out, which again, I don't love. Just like with Ned, I don't love that she found out. I feel like I could have actually done with Aunt May never finding out, but the fact that she did, it's okay, and I can deal with that. And then the Scorpion setup that hasn't paid off yet, and of course the little extra funny in credit scene with Captain America talking about patience. This is a really good film, one of the best Spider-Man films, if not the best Spider-Man film. So that's kind of why I really wanted to talk about this one a little bit longer. But I guess on to the next film.
Alright, so for this next film, let's go off on a little bit of a tangent. Venom, the original Venom, is an absolute masterpiece of a film. It's designed to be the perfect anti-superhero movie. The look at the symbiotes is a very big improvement from Spider-Man 3. Eddie Brock is such an interesting protagonist, and I really enjoy following his story. The tone of the film completely changes once Venom is introduced, and it's surprisingly fun for a movie starring Venom. You wouldn't expect Venom to be this more lighthearted character, and although I know many people have complaints with that, I personally really like it. In the film, Venom works because they want us to take Venom seriously, but he's actually really unironically funny, and I think that's something that they kind of took and ran with whenever it comes to the sequel. I really like Venom's design in this film though. Like, this is exactly how I would want an on-screen Venom to look. The pacing is really good. It is cheesy in all of the best ways. Riot is kind of a lame villain, I hate to say. And the CGI on the final fight scene should be the standard for any big budget like CGI final fight. It's really, really good. And the Stan Lee cameo at the end is really nice. One of the better Stan Lee cameos in any of these films. The Venom song, obviously everybody makes fun of it, but it's not that bad of a song that plays in the credits. And the tease of Carnage at the end is really good, and obviously that's what we're going to get into when going into the sequel.
Alright, let's go ahead and let's get into a little bit of a controversial take. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a film that I am not a huge fan of. But after rewatching, I did see a lot of improvements compared to what I felt the first time, so I kind of want to go a little bit in depth. I'm still not a huge fan of the art style of this film. I think that's one of the biggest things that I don't like. I'm a really big fan of animated films. The choppy, frame rate style of this animation is something that I'm not huge on, even though I know a lot of people are. The music in the film is pretty good. Uncle Aaron is watching Community in the background of one of the scenes, and I kind of like that. I didn't pick up on that the first time watching because I hadn't seen Community. The biggest thing about Into the Spider-Verse that I don't like is the Spider-Man PS4 game and Spider-Man Miles Morales the game does such a better job of telling Miles Morales' story. I really, really like the character of Miles, and I don't love the way that they tell his story in Into the Spider-Verse. The speech bubbles are cool. I don't like Kingpin's design. I really like Kingpin as a villain, and I don't love what they do with him here. Other than that, once you get to see all the different versions of Spider-Man, I think that's interesting. The moments where the story really slows down and really digs deep into these different characters like Miles and Gwen, I really like those moments. The talk between Miles and his dad is really powerful towards the end of the film, and I'm excited to see where they can go with a sequel for this movie, and the end credit scene was pretty funny, and that's what I've got to say about Into the Spider-Verse. Alright, you didn't seriously think I was going to go this whole video without talking about Spider-Ham. In the short, Caught in a Ham, it is one of the funniest Spider-Ham moments that we see in film. I didn't really love Spider-Ham in Into the Spider-Verse, even though I do like the character in the comics, so it was really cool to get to see this short where he really stands out. And I wouldn't mind seeing a full-length Spider-Ham film in the art style and the same type of humor and writing as this particular short in the future.
Alright, now for another little intermission. I want to do quite a few of these in between each of the big Spider-Man series that we kind of cover. And for this one, I just wanted to open up a Venom Funko Pop. I have a couple of Spider-Man Funko Pops. I don't know. I really feel like these characters lend themselves really well. I don't really know what I'm going to talk about in this segment other than, hey look, it looks pretty cool. That's really all that I got. But I hope you're enjoying the video so far. And with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next series. I hope you didn't mind this little intermission right here. Alright, let's talk about the greatest MCU movie, Avengers Infinity War. It feels like we didn't get to spend enough time with Peter before he takes on a villain as big as Thanos in this film, but that's kind of okay because Peter was such a late addition to the MCU, we were never going to get as much setup as we'd like. I've jokingly said before I'd like to see like a TV show in maybe the style of What If that takes place in between all the Spider-Man appearances in the MCU, because if in between each film he could be taking on smaller threats like the Tinkerer or the Shocker, and we could get like whole seasons based off that, and I think it would be really interesting. And then, we would have set up for why Peter goes from fighting the Vulture to fighting Thanos. But the Spider-Sense was confirmed, which is really cool. Spider-Man going to space was also just interesting to watch. It brings back the gag of a really old movie, this time with Alien, and I like that. The funny meeting of Doctor Strange and Peter kind of talking about their made-up names is a really fun scene. And actually, a really powerful scene that I don't think is supposed to be as powerful as it is Tony Stark telling Spider-Man, "You're an Avenger now." That scene really does, like, whenever you're looking at Spider-Man's whole story in the MCU, that is a very important part for his character that kind of gets brushed over. But either way, even if it is brushed over, I still think it's a very powerful scene. Putting him with the Guardians as well as Iron Man and Doctor Strange was really smart. Those are the exact characters that I would want to see Peter with. The battle on Titan is a really good fight scene, and then obviously we have to talk about Peter getting snapped. It was completely unexpected. I think everyone thought if one character was going to be safe going into that movie, it was Spider-Man. So seeing that he wasn't is really, really crazy. And yeah, I guess since Peter is dead now, I guess this is the end of the video. I guess he doesn't appear in the MCU again. There's definitely not another film that undoes everything like that came out immediately after. Which, like, I'm not complaining that everyone's back, but like, it doesn't happen, I'm sure. Alright, let's talk about Avengers Endgame. Peter and Morgan should have had a scene together. That's one of the most important things. I wrote that down initially. At the funeral, they should have been, like, both there. I would have liked to have seen what Peter was up to in the Battle of New York in 2012. During the time heist scene, I think that if there was any character you were going to reference there, Spider-Man would have been the one to do, since we know he was in New York at the time. Iron Man and Spider-Man reuniting is a really, really wholesome scene there in the final battle. We get a callback to the instant kill mode from Homecoming, which is good because Homecoming doesn't really get referenced very much in the big team-up movies. And I don't think, Far From Home, I don't think it will either. It was a really good way of telling the Uncle Ben story without having Uncle Ben. I feel like a lot of people don't give credit for what that is, because essentially what we got is where with Uncle Ben, you had very little knowledge of him before. With Tony Stark, we had tons of movies setting up exactly what it was leading to, so that's really good. I really like that. He should have said, "With great power comes great responsibility." He did not, unfortunately. That's the second time. But the MCU likes to wait for those big lines like they did for Avengers Assemble or Hulk Smash. They don't just throw them around constantly like you might see in the comic books. The Ned cameo was nice. You kind of got that skirt that kind of looks like it could be Spider-Gwen, so maybe that's getting set up. And then also, Iron Lad should have been in Far From Home. That was another really big thing that I put because you have him at the end. He's around the same age as Peter. He's also connected to Iron Man. It would make a really good rival character for Peter Parker. So I don't know why they didn't go that route. But either way, that's my thoughts on Endgame. At least my thoughts on Endgame that are linked directly to Spider-Man. Alright, I'm going off script a little bit for this moment. I've kind of already mentioned them in this video, but I wanted to talk about both the PS4 Spider-Man game as well as the Spider-Man Miles Morales game that launched with the PS5. Both of these games are amazing and some of the greatest video games of all time, and I truly do mean that. I love the way it feels to play as Spider-Man in these games. The stories are amazing. The villain of Dr. Octavius he's one of my favorite villains of all time. I know he wasn't in my top 10 villains list, but if I were to remake it right now, he would be very high up on that list. These games are great. Obviously, I'm running out of time because I want to spend a whole lot of time talking about No Way Home in this video. But for this little intermission, I just kind of wanted to bring this up. Alright, let's talk about Far From Home. The news report at the start is really funny, and it's kind of a nice callback to Homecoming, where we got a very similar, funny, more comedic starting scene. I like learning more about the Blip as well, and I like that it's called the Blip in this movie where we find out about it. I really like seeing him struggle with people wanting him to be the next Iron Man. I feel like that's a really smart way to take this particular version of Spider-Man's storyline. Betty and Ned are really funny together, and Mysterio's suit looks really cool, which is shocking because Mysterio's suit is not necessarily known for being the most cool looking. Nick Fury's introduction scene was really cool and kind of funny. Edith is a little too powerful. I would have liked to have maybe seen them turn down her power just slightly. I like the references to Iron Man being everywhere, though. I like that it really follows you throughout the film, and you see why he's struggling with this because he can't avoid it. I really like how Mysterio gets the name Mysterio as well. I like that it's the kids kind of bantering that makes it up. Mysterio's talk with Peter is also really, really good. At the beginning of the film, if you haven't seen it yet, which if you haven't, you need to go watch it. But if you don't know how it plays out, at the beginning of the film, Mysterio kind of plays out to be a good guy, but he ends up kind of revealing his true identity later in the film. So I really like that whenever he is pretending to be a good guy, that his talks with Peter really do stand out, and a lot of them are very true. The stuff with Brad, I didn't like that. I thought that was dumb. I don't understand why he needed a rival that was just like a guy. Peter having to leave the theater is really, really a sad scene. It's one of the most sad scenes out of like other than probably like Peter getting snapped, and it's really good the way they handle it, and it's up there with some of the best sad moments in any of these films. The stealth suit is kind of unique, but I don't love the design. But I'm also never a huge fan of the stealth suit. I like the symbiote suit. I like the Iron Spider, but I'm just not huge on the stealth suit. I feel like Fury should have treated Peter a little differently. I feel like he's slightly too harsh with him throughout the film. It's kind of weird. I get that Nick Fury is a harsh character, but he felt like uncharacteristically harsh. Which I know what you're gonna say, and don't worry, we'll talk about that twist later. But I still, even with that twist being there, it felt weird. Mysterio's twist was obvious, but it was handled amazingly. A twist that everyone knew Mysterio was going to be the bad guy. It still somehow came across really cool, and it is up there within the last film, the reveal that Vulture is Liz's father. The illusions are really cool. Not to mention, no mention of Liz does bug me throughout this film. I don't know why they didn't at least reference it. Happy and Peter's talk is also an amazing scene. An unpopular opinion, but I really like the scene where Tom Holland's Spider-Man builds a suit in the style of Iron Man. I know people don't like that he does that. They don't like that he's so similar to Iron Man in that way, but the way the story was set up was for him to kind of follow in Iron Man's footsteps, and this is a really good way of showing that, and it's a really good, really cool scene. It feels a little too similar to Homecoming in some ways. That's one of my biggest complaints with it. And I'm not a huge fan of the final fight in this film. I feel like the final fight in Homecoming was just way better because the drones just get really boring. I liked Ned a little bit more in Homecoming, so that's another thing. Even though it's similar to Homecoming, like I said, Homecoming is just a little bit better. The amazing in-credit scenes with J. Jonah Jameson from the Raimi films actually returning, which was, a crazy reveal. Really interesting setup for No Way Home, where we get to kind of learn about Peter, being on the run. And then the Skrulls twist. It's a cool twist. It's nothing that special, though. Alright, so we got a short now. We have Peter's to-do list, which is canon to the MCU, so I guess we'll talk about it. The deli guy from Homecoming makes a cameo, which is nice. The spider drone also returns. There's a lot of little references to Homecoming that I would have liked to have seen in the film. It's just a little bit of a fun short. It's nothing too special, but it's worth a watch if you haven't seen it yet, because this is one of the only MCU things that I hadn't seen going into this rewatching.
So, as you guys may or may not know, as I'm recording this video, I'm actually recording each individual segment live after I've seen the film. And Venom 2, whenever I'm recording this, is currently in theaters. I went and saw it opening night, and let's just kind of talk about my feelings on it, which this is one of any of the films on the list that as I watch it more, it could change, but at the moment, this is how I felt about it. The first act, Venom went way too heavy on the jokes. I kind of said, whenever I was talking about the first film, that I really thought that Venom, was unintentionally funny. I think the creators of the film really looked at that and ran all the way with it. And while I do think once we kind of start hitting Act 2 and Act 3, they start getting it right again, I do think that first act kind of struggles with having Venom go way too hard on the jokes. Woody Harrelson does a great job playing Carnage. Carnage hacks a computer with his tentacles. I had to write that down in the theaters because I wanted to make sure that I talked about how weird that was. Venom and Eddie separating was kind of dumb, but once they teamed up again, they finally made Venom go back to how great he was in the first film. It's like they separated, which was kind of weird, but once they got back together, it worked really, really well. The Red Wedding scene is kind of what I labeled it as, is amazing and should be an example for setting up a good final fight. If there's one thing I can say about the two Venom films specifically, is that they have amazing final fight scenes. I thought they were going to pull a Gwen in Amazing Spider-Man 2 whenever Venom and Eddie's girlfriend, I think it's Anne is her name, got dropped. I thought they were going to pull the Gwen Stacy thing again, but they didn't, and I like the way that they handled it. It's way better than Venom 1's final fight scene, even though I did like the Venom 1 fight scene a lot, as you heard me mention earlier. And obviously the end credit scene is amazing. The end credit scene, if you don't already know, spoilers obviously, sets up that Eddie Brock and Venom were kind of sucked into the MCU through the multiverse. I'm assuming it's Doctor Strange's spell. At the time of recording this, I haven't seen No Way Home. This is actually the second film that I've covered where the end credit scene played an important role on setting up a sequel. To the point to where if you don't see the next part, I assume that you're going to be missing a pretty big part of the story. And also, I wanted to just kind of throw this out as a little funny thing. The M&M candy bars are one of the best candies that exist, and that's the candy that Venom was eating. Hopefully I can find like a picture or something to prove that, but Venom has good taste in chocolate, I guess.
Alright, now for the final appearance of Spider-Man before we get into Spider-Man No Way Home, and that appearance is actually What If Zombies. It's actually the only episode of What If to feature Peter Parker, which I found kind of weird, but it's kind of fun at the beginning of the episode to see Peter vlogging again. I like that he mentions Uncle Ben. I'm not one of the people who claim that, the MCU really needed an Uncle Ben to tell a good Spider-Man story. I think it does just fine, just focusing on Tony and Peter. I like that the friendship that they set up between Hope and Peter, I like that one a lot. T'Challa and Peter's speech, or like conversation that they have at the very end of the episode, is really wholesome, and I like that. That's a good note to end on. And I like that Peter references a ton of movies throughout this episode, kind of like he does in the Avengers films. I've always liked that characteristic of Peter in the MCU, and I think that's something that they should lean into even more going forward.
Alright, so just like we did in the first part, here at the end I want to really rapid fire kind of talk about the rest or the other half of the Spider-Man shows that I didn't cover in the first video. So let's just go ahead and get into this. Ultimate Spider-Man is really cool. I really like the suit, and I like some of the, specifically I like some of the crossovers this show did. I like the Mission Marvel with Phineas and Ferb that they did. And I also like the Jesse crossover, which I didn't even know existed before going into it. It's kind of a weird crossover, but it was interesting to see these characters. Up next, Spider-Man 2017. A lot of people seem not to like this one. The few episodes that I watched, I thought it was really cool, and this is a show I'd like to come back and maybe watch some more of later. And then last but not least, I have to talk about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which is a show for kids. I don't really know what you want me to say here. I think it's cool how Dr. Octopus is, they use like the Spider-Verse version. I like that. And I just like seeing Miles and Gwen be part of the show. But other than that, that's all I've got to say for the rest of the shows. Alright, so this is your last warning. Spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home. Let's go ahead and let's wrap up this video. Alright, so this story in this film, or not really the story, but the pacing is very similar to Endgame, which is alright. But one thing that I actually, on rewatch for Endgame, that I don't really love, is that there are moments that are really slow and then really cool moments. And with the film being so long, it's kind of hard to balance that out. And I feel like this Spider-Man No Way Home is going to feel very similar to Endgame in the long run. But a few highlights that I really liked. The stuff with Matt Murdock was awesome. I love the Daredevil show. It's a really good show, and I really liked being just to see him show up, and that was one of those standout moments for me in the theater. Doctor Strange in the film, on the other hand, though, is only okay. I don't love a lot of the decisions they did with him, but I am happy with the fact that he kind of did get pushed to the sideline after his scenes, only to come back at the end, which I did like. Again, spoilers, but I'm going to go ahead and get into this. The Toby and Andrew stuff, specifically them being in the film. Andrew was a standout in this film, and this actually, while doing all of this rewatch that I've done for this video, for these two videos, as well as this particular film, I think I really like Andrew's Peter more than I realized. Also, Toby, he is alright. I think, unlike Andrew, I don't think he came back and was this perfect version of his Spider-Man. But he was pretty cool, and I do like him. All the villains coming back was really cool. I like that they don't all have the same goal. I liked it that like Sandman was only going back for his family, in compared to Green Goblin, who had no interest in going back. And Dr. Octopus, one of my favorite villains, really liked seeing him back. Lizard was pretty cool. I liked his new design. I liked Electro. I didn't love him being blue, but I still don't feel like they got his suit as perfect as I'd like. I think the best version of his suit is the PS4 game. Let's talk a little bit about the ending of this particular film. The Lego Emperor, the story arc that little toy went throughout the MCU is really cool. Aunt May's death, I feel like it could have been maybe a little better, but it worked in the scene it was in. I didn't really feel this like really emotional moment that a lot of people feel with it though. The end credit scene, other than the trailer, which I'm not going to talk about here because there's nothing Spider-Man really related to that trailer. But the Venom, that's a huge plot hole, now that I've seen this film. Venom never should have been sucked into the MCU because he doesn't know who Peter Parker is. So I found that really weird, and I hope maybe they explain that in Venom 3. But that's really all that I've got to say about this movie. I'm sure I'll talk more about it at some point in a future video, but Spider-Man No Way Home is a really good time, and I really recommend it. There's actually just a few more things in this video that we're going to cover before it's over. I'm probably going to rank the films, and I would like to talk about where I'd like to see the MCU going forward, because obviously if you've seen this film at the very end, no one knows who Peter Parker is anymore, and I think that would make 3 really good movies going forward. So I'll talk about what I would like to see in those. and some more, but that's it for this particular review. Alright, and as we are, like I said, wrapping things up, I did want to kind of talk about, after watching No Way Home, what I would like to see going forward for the Spider-Man films. Specifically, what I would like to see is some kind of story with Venom, which they kind of set up in the end credit scene, so I think that will happen. I'd like to see something with Future Foundation. I know that's unpopular, but with the Fantastic Four coming into the MCU, I really do want to see Future Foundation, because that is a comic series that I personally really like. And I'd like to see Black Cat show up. Maybe Liz from Homecoming could come back and play her. I think that would be interesting. And with that being said, let's just go ahead and get into the very end. Alright, so at this point, you've seen me talk about Spider-Man for an hour, if not over an hour at this point, so I am going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I can't lie, I'm really excited to work on some videos that are not Spider-Man, but I really did like No Way Home, and I hope that you all enjoyed it too. I don't know, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what they do with the next Spider-Verse film, because I wasn't a huge fan of the original, and I'm curious just to see what all happens next. So, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all later. Goodbye, guys.